Resuming debate, reprise the débat, the honourable member for Western Arctic.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I'll be asking questions here. My critics area is Northern Development, so we'll be taking a number of questions in that area, but we'll also move on to some on the broader responsibilities of the minister. Why did the government not consult all the First Nations in the Northwest Territories prior to negotiating devolution of powers to the government of the Northwest Territories?
The Honourable Minister.
I'm really surprised by the question. I mean, this honourable member should know better than any other members of the House. There was indeed a wide and very substantial consultation process that is taking place as we speak. Of course, in March we announced that a general consensus had been reached, but we are in the process of consulting with all First Nations throughout in order to not only meet our obligation, but to ensure for the benefit of Northerners the success of devolution.
The Honourable Member for Western Arctic.
Not involved in the negotiations on devolution, and and consultation with them after the agreement has been signed is not consultation, but simply showing them what's going to happen. As the Premier of the Northwest Territories indicated, the deal was take it or leave it. There is no negotiation anymore, so how can you have consultation with no negotiation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, Canada and the government of the Northwest Territories continue to encourage and support participation of the two other regional Aboriginal groups to which he refers. The Government of Canada remains committed to fulfilling its Section 35 obligation and responsibilities to consult Aboriginal groups in the Northwest Territories with respect to devolution. We're doing it.
The Honourable Member.
Well, getting to the agreement itself, one of the most important acts in Parliament is the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, which governs all resource development terms and conditions. Now, in the agreement, the minister will delegate certain powers to the territorial minister. This act will not be transferred. Is the minister and this government going to turn the full power of the right to say yes or no to the terms and conditions of development to the territorial minister, or will the territorial minister remain one minister among the other ministers of the federal government in making those determinations?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, I will not accept the invitation of the honourable member to put the cart before the horses. There is a consensus on the general term of the devolution agreement. Consultations are taking place, and after those consultations have taken place and the accommodations that can be made are being made, then there will be an agreement. But I cannot tonight here talk about what the results would be before these consultations take place. He ought to know better.
The Honourable Member.
The Premier of the Northwest Territories indicated there were to be no changes to the agreement that was signed by the Prime Minister in Yellowknife in February. There was no changes, or March, there was no changes to be made. So how can we be still talking about the conditions of the deal if there's no changes that are going to be made to the agreement?
The Honourable Minister.
If the honourable member is at least familiar with the consultations taking place and the duty to consult and the conditions of the agreements that are in place which compel these consultations, then, I mean, what can I say? The fact of the matter is that there is no reached agreement yet. There is a consensus on the terms of the agreement. The consultation must take place. It is taking place. And when this is accomplished, we will know what the conditions will then be.
The Honourable Member.
Well, if there was no agreement made, what was the final agreement that the Prime Minister signed in Yellowknife? Was that not a final agreement? This is really news, I'm sure, to everyone that's listening from the Northwest Territories.
The Honourable Minister.
About the Northwest Territories? I mean, if the honourable member is referring to the March 11th event that we did in Yellowknife, where I was with my learned friend, the Minister of Health, and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was very clear. He said that the heavy lifting had been done, that there was a consensus reached on the terms for an agreement, but he was clear. The Prime Minister said clearly there, I was present, that consultations had to take place with the Aboriginal communities, as we have too. And until this is done, I'm sorry, there's no agreement.
The honourable member.
Okay, well, I'll leave that then. Will the minister confirm that the cost of the taxpayers to clean up the giant mine is over $900 million and is still expected to rise?
The honourable minister.
Well, if the NDP wants to put a price on the health and safety of the residents of that community, we will not.
Hear, hear. Bravo!
The honourable member.
Well, that's certainly true, because the minister's staff would not indicate to the environmental assessment what the cost was going to be. So yes, the minister doesn't want to put a cost to it, but will the cost exceed $900 million?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, the median project will pass through several phases and take many years. This will not happen overnight. The giant mine remediation project team's first priority is the health and safety of the public and its staff and the protection of the environment. So before multi-year cost projections will move over time as work progresses, and Parliament and Canadians will be kept up to date, I can assure you.
Honourable member.
Well, that's actually in good news, because the minister then will probably agree that we need to look at the ionization process to ensure that the water coming out of the giant mine site has no arsenic in it. So will the minister instruct his staff then to consider the ionization process that has been outlined by the environmental assessment process to deal with this particular problem of pollution there?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, my department is currently addressing specific high risk at the giant mine site through a care and maintenance program that works to protect the environment and minimize the risk to human health and safety. I mean, two of the largest and most urgent components, the roaster complex and the stabilization of the underground, are set to begin right next month in June. And a remediation plan has been prepared for the management of the giant mine site, and is currently undergoing an environmental assessment. I guess you should know that.
The honourable member.
Why did the minister change regulations on downhole injection of drill waste, removing them from the Northwest Territories water regulations just before the agreement was going, the movement forward with the agreement to change legislation?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, the steps that we are taking in Northern Canada are all pursuant to a Northern strategy that takes into account the benefit to Northerners of responsible development and protection of the environment. Now, I know that any development for the NDP, they call it a disease, but in the North, they call it future benefit and economic development for Northerners and jobs, yes.
The honourable member.
Well, downhole injection of drill waste is a pretty straightforward issue. The minister changed the regulations. He's put them under the Canada Oil and Gas Operations Act. They're not going to come in front of any environmental assessment in the Northwest Territories. Can the minister explain why he did that?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, let me repeat. Our government is aiming for a northern regulatory regime that is more effective, that is predictable, while safeguarding the environmental health and heritage of the North. This is what Northerners have asked us to do as a Conservative government, and this is what we will deliver.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Western Arctic.
5 minutes. Thank you very much. Land Claims Implementation Coalition is concerned about the changing to funding for the implementation of their land claims. Is the government still planning to move to per capita funding, or are they changing the funding formula in any way?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, I did meet with the coalition. As a matter of fact, this was one of the first things that I did upon being sworn in as minister. We had a real good working session where I have learned that indeed the coalition was ready to work in partnership with the federal government to ensure that these Canada obligations be implemented. And we are working in partnership with the coalition to see to it that all of Canada's obligations be implemented in the best possible delay in accordance with our duty of diligent implementation.
Honourable member.
In the United States, any transfers of offshore leases have to be signed off by the President of the United States. In Canada, the minister only has to be notified for a transfer of lease on offshore oil and gas developments. Will the minister countenance in the near term changing the legislation to give him more control over the transfer of offshore leases?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, I will repeat what I said earlier. What we are committed to is ensuring that the North has a regulatory regime that is more effective, predictable, while safeguarding the environmental health and heritage of the North. So we are committed to that principle, and I'm sure that in cooperation with the government in place on the territories, we can achieve that objective to ensure the sound and substantial economic development of all of the North for the benefit of Northerners and also of Canada.
Order. The honourable member for the Western Arctic.
In the last budget, there was talk about clean energy for Aboriginal communities in Northern Canada. Can the minister outline any of the efforts that he's taken in that regard over the last year?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, as everyone knows in this House, this government is committed to job creation, economic growth, and the long-term prosperity of all Canadians, including Northerners. And we will continue on our quest to create jobs, ensure proper, responsible economic development, and we would just hope that the member in question, who asked the question, who comes from there, would stop voting against these positive measures for his territory.
The honourable member.
When the minister talked about housing for reserves, he talked about 1,700 houses built on 620 some odd reserves. That works out to less than 2 or 3 houses per reserve per year. He talked about renovations to housing on reserves. There was 3,000 houses renovated. Now that works out to less than 5 houses per reserve. Does the minister think that less than 3 houses per reserve and less than 5 houses renovated per reserve is the number that's required to fix the problem of housing on Aboriginal reserves across Canada?
The honourable minister.
What this minister believes and knows is that between 2006 and 7 and 2012-13, we have provided approximately $1.2 billion in on-reserve housing support to First Nation communities. And according to First Nations report, the Government of Canada's investment have contributed to, on average, an average of 1,750 new units and 3,100 renovations annually over the past 5 years. Now, the provision and management of housing on reserve land is primarily the responsibility of First Nation, with support from the Government of Canada, and I'm proud of our support.
The honourable member, this is your final question.
Okay. When it comes to capital funding for schools, the minister has indicated $118 million a year. There's 600 reserves across Canada. We've heard figures of 48 schools that need to be replaced. At the capital cost for replacing a school in a remote and isolated community, I know very well, coming from the Northwest Territories, is probably in excess of $30 million. Is the minister thinking that somehow that this $118 million for the capital replacement budget that he's indicated for reserve schools is going to be adequate to actually catch up to the problem that we have with Aboriginal schools being substandard across this country?
Honourable Minister, you have 30 seconds to respond.
If the honourable member is really concerned about education and schools for First Nations across the country, why do they oppose a National Education Act that would identify mechanism to ensure long-term, sustainable, predictable funding for a school system in Canada? I mean, we already invest, we provide annual investment of approximately $200 million a year for on-school reserve infrastructure. And between April 2006 and March 2012, we have provided funding to support the completion of 429 school projects, including the building of 36 new schools.
The honourable member for Peace River.